The story surrounding the new Tesla Roadster is becoming much more interesting because over the past few weeks, several new leaks, comments from people who worked inside Tesla, and some rather strange hints from Elon Musk himself have emerged. And when all this information is put together, it becomes clear that Tesla is indeed preparing something far beyond an ordinary presentation of another electric supercar. The company is planning a demonstration that could literally make the Roadster leave the ground. And now this is no longer simply Musk's 8-year-old promise. Reuters, citing an investigation by The Information, reports that Tesla could unveil a completely redesigned Roadster as early as August 2026, with the centerpiece of the event potentially being a special limited version of the car equipped with cold gas thrusters, developed in cooperation with SpaceX. Moreover, the potential presentation venue is reportedly not a Tesla Gigafactory or an ordinary automotive test track, but the SpaceX test facility in McGregor, Texas. And the more details emerge, the stronger the impression becomes that the word flying is not being used merely for the sake of an attractive headline. According to people familiar with the development, engineers initially considered ideas that brought the Roadster remarkably close to an actual aircraft. But the concept gradually evolved toward briefly hovering above the ground. One source described this transformation very simply. At first, the team was almost trying to build an airplane, but ended up with something much closer to hovering. And even that sounds insane, because we are talking about a full-sized heavy car, not a 5-kilogram drone, not an experimental platform, and not an eVTOL with enormous propellers. Tesla is attempting to make a real hypercar lift its own weight off the ground using a system of reaction control thrusters. And this technology exists not only in Musk's imagination. In June, The Information reported that the system had received the internal codename A71, and that Tesla and SpaceX engineers had already demonstrated an early version of the technology to Musk as far back as late April. It was also reported that Tesla was considering two versions of the vehicle, an extreme Roadster with the full SpaceX package, and a simpler version without all of the rocket-assisted capabilities. Then, new information emerged that makes the story even more interesting. Former Tesla president John McNeil, who worked at the company from 2015 to 2018, told CNBC that the idea of using SpaceX technology in the Roadster appeared practically at the very beginning of the project, around 2016. According to him, the original goal was much simpler. Tesla wanted to create the fastest accelerating production car in the world. At the time, the company was discussing acceleration to 60 miles per hour in roughly 1.6 to 1.8 seconds. But then the project began becoming increasingly ambitious, and McNeil now says that he does not know whether we will see actual flight, but during the demonstration we could indeed see the Roadster hover. For someone who once led Tesla's global sales and service operations and was present during the early formation of the Roadster program, that is a particularly interesting comment, especially considering that just days before the main leak, Tesla's chief designer Franz von Holzhausen appeared on Jay Leno's show. When Leno told him that he was still waiting for the Roadster, von Holzhausen replied twice, "Very soon." Leno reminded him that almost 10 years had already passed, but the designer once again indicated that the car really is getting closer. At the same time, he did not, of course, give a specific date. Even earlier, Musk had described the Roadster several times in terms that would sound completely absurd for an ordinary car. He called the future demonstration potentially one of the most memorable product presentations in history. He said the car would be crazier than all of James Bond's cars combined. And when asked whether the Roadster would actually be able to fly, Musk deliberately refused to reveal the answer, suggesting that people wait for the demonstration. Several years ago, in a conversation with Joe Rogan, he explained the original concept in fairly specific terms. An ultra-strong tank containing gas under enormous pressure in place of the rear seats, along with several reaction control thrusters positioned around the vehicle. Musk even talked about pressure levels of around 10,000 psi and the possibility of making the Roadster hover roughly 1 meter above the ground, although those old figures do not necessarily apply to the final 2026 vehicle. The basic principle of the technology itself is not science fiction. A cold gas thruster is much simpler than a conventional rocket engine. There is no need to burn kerosene, methane, or any other fuel. Gas is stored in a tank under extremely high pressure. When a valve opens, the gas is expelled through a nozzle at very high velocity, creating thrust in the opposite direction. That is precisely why the system is called a cold gas thruster. There is no combustion chamber and no enormous plume of fire. Similar thrusters have been used on spacecraft for decades to control orientation and perform small maneuvers. But a car creates a completely different problem. To simply hover in the air, the total vertical thrust must at least compensate for its weight. If we imagine a hypothetical roadster weighing around 2 metric tons, the system would need to generate roughly 20 kilonewtons of vertical thrust just to keep the vehicle from falling. To make it begin rising, the thrust would have to be even greater. And at the same time, the computer would have to continuously control the vehicle's balance. Because if the front left thruster produces slightly more thrust than the right one, the car will begin to rotate. If the rear receives too much impulse, the Roadster will pitch nose down. On the road, these problems are corrected by the tires, suspension, and stability control systems. In the air, there are no tires providing that contact with the ground. So for several seconds, the Tesla Roadster would literally transform from a car into an aircraft, while its control system would have to operate somewhat like the flight controller of a gigantic drone. And this may explain another extremely interesting detail from the latest leak. During the demonstration itself, the car may not have anyone inside it at all. Reuters reports that Tesla is considering remotely controlling the Roadster because of the force and noise generated by the reaction control system. The information reports an even more unusual detail. Spectators could be positioned several hundred yards away from the vehicle because of the noise and vibration produced by the thrusters. Now imagine what the presentation itself could look like. Nightfall or sunset in Texas. A huge SpaceX test facility. Spectators and company employees standing in the distance. In front of them appears a car the public has never seen before. And it will probably be very different from the red Roadster Tesla unveiled in 2017. The vehicle accelerates across the test area, then stops in a specially prepared zone. The reaction control system activates. Gas begins rushing from the thrusters. The computer automatically stabilizes the body. The suspension unloads. The wheels begin to lose contact with the ground, and for the first time the Roadster hovers above the test area. And according to the leaks, Tesla considered an even crazier scenario. The information claims that several months ago, the demonstration plan included a special structure resembling a magnetic roller coaster. The Roadster was supposed to accelerate, enter a specially designed ramp, travel part of the trajectory upside down, then return to its normal orientation and subsequently hover in the air. It is unknown whether this stunt will remain in the final presentation. Sources say that some parts of the show have already been cut, while Musk has reportedly warned employees that the demonstration is technically extremely difficult and that something could easily go wrong. And this is where it becomes clear why the Roadster has been delayed for almost a decade. Tesla could have created a simply very fast electric supercar many years ago, but the problem is that by 2026, simply being a fast electric car will no longer impress anyone. Rimac, Lucid, Porsche, Xiaomi, and Chinese manufacturers have learned how to build cars with astonishing levels of power. Some modern electric vehicles accelerate so quickly that the 1.9 second 0 to 60 miles per hour figure Tesla promised in 2017 no longer makes the impression it did 9 years ago. That is why Musk kept moving the target further. At first, the Roadster was supposed to destroy gasoline-powered supercars. Then it was supposed to become the fastest car in the world. Then came the SpaceX package. Then came the figure of around 1.1 seconds to 60 miles per hour. And then came the idea of making it fly. And perhaps that is precisely why Tesla abandoned the original design altogether. Reuters reports that the program evolved from a relatively conventional high-performance electric vehicle, in which the use of Model S Plaid components was considered, into an entirely new carbon fiber hypercar. In other words, the 2026 Roadster appears to genuinely be a completely different car, rather than simply an updated version of the 2017 prototype. The information reveals even more details. At certain stages of the design process, the team reportedly looked to the Lamborghini Countach, one of the most unusual supercars in history, as a reference. Later, Franz von Holzhausen reportedly wanted to give the vehicle elements reminiscent of the legendary SR-71 Blackbird supersonic reconnaissance aircraft. This is reportedly what the project's internal designation A-71 was associated with. Tesla studied unusual shapes, angles, and aerodynamic solutions, while the company brought in specialists with experience in the Italian supercar industry, including former Lamborghini engineering executive Stefan Notdurfter. In other words, the Roadster could look far more aggressive than the prototype we know. Business Insider previously reported that recent versions were already two-seaters, featured butterfly doors, and that Tesla had significantly intensified its work on aerodynamic prototyping. The company has also filed new trademark applications for Roadster. This is not proof of imminent production, but there are an increasing number of indirect signs that the project has genuinely come back to life. At the same time, Tesla's official website looks almost comical. It still features the 2017 version of the Roadster. Tesla continues to list a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 1.9 seconds, a top speed of more than 250 miles per hour, and a range of 620 miles. It still says the car has 4 seats, even though the latest leaks point to a much more radical 2-seat vehicle. The result is a strange situation. The official Roadster seems to exist in 2017, while the real Roadster that engineers are apparently developing today has moved very far beyond it. And this raises one of the biggest questions. If the rocket-assisted Roadster really exists, why would Tesla build it at all? Sales of such a car would have virtually no impact on the company's financial results. Even if Tesla sold several thousand Roadsters, that would be a drop in the bucket compared with the Model 3 and Model Y. Cybercab could potentially be far more important to Tesla's future business. Optimus, if successfully commercialized, could create an entirely new market worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Tesla's energy business is growing rapidly. Against this backdrop, developing an ultra-expensive car that can hover above the ground for a few seconds seems like a strange use of engineering resources. But the Roadster is not a mass-market product. It is a halo car. A car that exists to demonstrate the limits of what the company is capable of, and Tesla may genuinely need exactly this kind of product right now. John McNeil himself told CNBC that Musk understands the need to bring energy and excitement back to Tesla's automotive business, and that the Roadster is a natural way to do it. In recent years, attention around the company has increasingly shifted away from cars toward artificial intelligence, robotaxis, Optimus, xAI, and SpaceX. The Roadster could once again make a Tesla vehicle the main character of the internet, at least for a few days. All it would take is one video. A red or black Roadster standing on a SpaceX test site. A countdown begins. The car rises 1 meter above the ground, hovers, moves forward, and lands again. Even if the entire flight lasts only 5 or 10 seconds, those images could spread around the planet within hours. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that the exact duration of the hover has not been reliably confirmed. A figure of around 10 seconds is circulating widely on social media, but the main reports from Reuters and The Information do not provide a confirmed flight duration. And this is where the Roadster begins to serve roughly the same purpose that the original Roadster served 20 years ago. Tesla's first car was never supposed to conquer the global market. It was supposed to prove that an electric car could be desirable. In the mid-2000s, electric cars were associated with small, slow vehicles for environmental enthusiasts. The Roadster presented a completely different picture. Electricity could mean speed. The second Roadster faces a much more difficult task, because a fast electric car is already the norm today, so the new Roadster has to prove something completely different. A car does not necessarily have to be limited to the capabilities of 4 tires, and that is potentially much more interesting than the hovering itself. Imagine that Tesla has genuinely learned to control several reaction thrusters positioned around the body with millisecond-level precision. They would not necessarily have to be used only for flight. A rear-facing thruster could provide additional thrust during acceleration. A forward-facing thruster could assist with braking. Side-mounted thrusters could theoretically generate impulses while cornering, and vertical thrusters could temporarily increase or decrease the effective load on the vehicle. Musk was talking about this many years ago. The SpaceX package was supposed to improve acceleration, braking, and cornering. Flight was more like the extreme application of the technology, and if Tesla has actually brought this system to a functional state, the Roadster could become the first car whose dynamics depend not only on tires, motors, and aerodynamics, but also on additional independent thrust. Imagine braking a supercar at a speed of 300 kilometers per hour. Today, the limit is determined by aerodynamics, brakes, and tire grip. Now imagine that at the same moment, the vehicle receives several thousand additional newtons of thrust in the opposite direction. Theoretically, the braking distance could be reduced. The same applies during launch. A conventional car is limited by how much force the tires can transmit to the asphalt. A reaction thruster does not care about the tire's grip on the road at all. It simply pushes the vehicle forward. That is why Musk's claimed acceleration of around 1.1 seconds does not appear to violate the laws of physics. The problem is not whether such acceleration can be generated. The problem is how to make it controllable, safe, and repeatable. With acceleration to 60 miles per hour in approximately 1.1 seconds, the average acceleration approaches 2.5 g. For a passenger, this is an entirely different physical experience. The person would be pushed violently into the seat. A head that the passenger failed to press firmly against the headrest would experience enormous forces. Any unsecured object inside the cabin would become a projectile. As a result, the Roadster could require completely different seats, restraints, and control algorithms designed to prevent the maximum mode from being activated accidentally. But the biggest problem with the SpaceX package is the gas supply. A conventional electric motor uses energy from the battery and can operate for a relatively long time. A cold gas thruster ejects its working fluid into the atmosphere. Every time the Roadster uses thrust, its gas supply decreases. That is why such thrusters are ideal for short, powerful impulses but are terrible for sustained flight of a heavy vehicle. And this makes it obvious why the Roadster cannot replace an airplane or an eVTOL. A true electric air taxi uses large rotors that continuously capture the surrounding air and accelerate it downward. The Roadster has to carry its supply of gas with it. If it needs to hover for a few seconds, that is possible. If it needs to fly for 20 minutes, the amount of propellant required becomes a huge problem. Then there is the question of refueling. If the tank is depleted after several extreme acceleration runs or a single hover, how long would it take a compressor to restore the necessary pressure? 5 minutes? Half an hour? An hour? Tesla has not said anything about this so far. There is an even more serious problem: tank safety. Gas at pressures of thousands of psi requires an extremely strong pressure vessel. Musk previously talked about a composite tank based in principle on SpaceX technologies. But cars get into accidents. They can be hit from the side or from behind, or they can roll over. Such a tank would therefore have to be protected against damage under virtually any collision scenario. Another problem is the people around the vehicle. Even cold gas does not mean harmless gas. A high-velocity jet can lift sand, rocks, metal objects, and debris into the air. Imagine activating vertical thrusters in an ordinary parking lot with a person standing nearby. Or imagine a rear thruster firing in traffic directly in front of another vehicle. And this is precisely why the most important new detail in the Reuters report is that the extreme SpaceX version of the Roadster may not even be approved for ordinary roads, according to sources. It could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even millions, and exist as an extremely limited track-only vehicle. The regular Roadster and the SpaceX version are expected to look similar, but their actual capabilities could be dramatically different. This completely changes how the project should be viewed. Perhaps Tesla is not actually trying to sell people a mass-market flying car at all. The company could build a few dozen or a few hundred insane SpaceX Roadsters designed exclusively for closed tracks, while selling a much more conventional Roadster without the full flight system alongside them. And from a regulatory perspective, this approach looks much more realistic. Because the moment a car is genuinely capable of lifting itself off the ground and moving through the air, a very unpleasant legal question arises. Is it still a car, or has it become an aircraft? Who is supposed to certify it? The NHTSA? The FAA? Both organizations? What kind of license would the owner need? What happens if someone tries to activate hover mode on a public road? That is why the first version of this technology would almost certainly have to exist in the most controlled environment possible. But if Tesla does demonstrate a working system, the consequences could extend far beyond a single Roadster.